Hey guys, it's Arcade, and today I'm gonna show you how to turn an idea of a drop, sort of a sketch idea, and turn it into a full feature-based drop. So first I'm gonna play you the drop idea. That is sort of a sketch idea. It's like pretty boring, nothing stands out, it's definitely not a full song. And then I'm gonna show you how to turn it into a full drop that you can actually use in a song. So yeah, here's the idea that I'm working with. So basically I got the chords, I got the bass and the drums. And this is how it sounds. And yeah, that's the idea of a drop. It's pretty like generic. It is a good start, but it's not original in any way. So what we are gonna do is turn this idea into something like this. Here is a preview of what we are going to turn it in. So yeah, that's just a little preview. Let me show you how to do it, and then I'm gonna play the whole thing. So first we start with this, which is like the base of the drop. So let me show you how I created this, which is pretty simple. I'll be actually using the sounds from SoundConstraints, who hooked me up with their new pack called Apollo, and they are all about focusing on the quality of the sounds rather than quantity. So there is not as many presets, but all the presets you get are really good and kind of work well together. So yeah, if you want to check it out, link will be below in the description. And all the sounds you hear in this video are from their pack. So first we start with the chords, which is this lead shattered runner, and I turn out the mode wheel all the way up, and we got this chord sound, which is really nice. So as you can hear, I have a chord progression here. So to make chords like these, they might seem a bit complicated, but they are really not. To create chords like these, you basically create your basic chords. I started with E. So your basic chord is the first note, then you have 3 spaces in between, then you have the 4th note, then 2 spaces and the 3rd note. And that's like a really basic chord. And you can make it minor by moving the middle note. But yeah, this is the chord, and it's the same one that I have here. But the difference is that I take these notes and some of them will be repeated in multiple octaves. So for example, we can put this one octave up, then maybe the B note again, and E note. So yeah, I'm just taking the notes from this chord and repeating them in different octaves. You can repeat them as many times as you want and end up on whatever sounds right to you. You know, it's just the same notes from that one chord, which is E, G sharp, and B. So yeah, if you want to create chords like those, just start off with the basic chord progression and then repeat some of the notes in different octaves. And that ends up looking like this. One thing I want to mention that I did to the sound is enable the portamento and set it to always. That's how we get this pitch transition every time the chord hits. Without it, it wouldn't be there. It would be just plain chords. So that's one thing I did. So that's the chords. For the effects, I have Fruity stereo shaper on it. So the chord sound is like not in the middle of the mix or in the middle of your speakers, but it's to the sides. So that sort of gives it this more roomy feel. Then we have the EQ. I deleted the low frequencies, boosted a little bit of the high frequencies, and I have some reverb on it, just a little bit, to make it more spacious. Then we have the sub bass, also from the pack. It's this one called Bass Shattered. I lowered the cutoff so it's more sub bassy. And the sub bass just follows the root notes of the chords. Then we have the gritty bass, which is really important to include in some way. That makes the chords more fodder, more full. And this one is called Another Self. And it's a pretty aggressive bass. It's almost like dubsteppy. It worked well with the chord sound, because without it, it's like sort of thin. But if you add the gritty bass, right off the bat, the chord sound gets fodder. So that is a really important element as far as the sound goes. To add the gritty bass, it actually fills out some of the frequencies that the chord is lacking. And it's not the chord that brings the power to the drop, it's actually this gritty bass. So then I have the drums, accidentally renamed them, but these are the drums. From Kashmir's pack. This snare and this rim snare. And I put a lot of reverb on the snare with 1 second decay and just boosted some of the frequencies around 200 to make it like pop out more. So you want that power in the snare. So yeah, that's our basic sound. That's basically the idea of a drop. You get the chords, you get the sounds picked out, and you get the drums. So that's good enough for the idea, but it's not a full song, it's just an idea. So let me show you how you can turn this into a full-fledged drop. So the first thing I did here is cut up the chords. So instead of having it like this, I put some spaces in between. So that's what I do, I just cut them up like that. That actually gives us some space to work with. In those empty spaces, we can fill it out with some other sounds. I do the same with the bass and even added these little fills for the bass. So yeah, you don't have to do these fills, but I felt like they were a pretty good fit. But again, instead of having long notes just playing throughout, we add some empty spaces in there for the snare or for some effects. So then it sounds like this. Oh, and a really important thing I forgot to mention that creates this movement in the whole song is the Kickstart plugin. And you can use any sidechain plugin like LFO Tool or even Grossbeat, or just sidechain it manually. But what this does is instead of having long notes, you enable the kickstart and it will like pump the sound. Again, you could use Grossbeat, which is an FL Studio. Let me just find it like this. Go to sidechain preset and adjust this so it's a little bit better fitting for what you are going for. But it would sound something like this. Again, this is too harsh, so you would just sort of play around with these. Maybe something like this. If you hold the Alt key, it will snap to the grid easily. Yeah, you would just set it up so it sounds perfect to you, but that's why I prefer Kickstart, because it's already sort of set up the way I like it. But yeah, that's pretty important. Back to what I was saying, I cut up the chords and the bass, create some space in between so we can play around with that. Then we move on to the drums. I actually made the drums more interesting by adding some drum enhancers from the Kashmir's pack. And that is something like this, the stomp and this stomp. And basically, before it was like this. Now we add the stomps here and there to make it more interesting. Doesn't add too much, but it actually makes it a little bit more interesting in the whole mix. Some of the drum hits are more obvious because we add the stomps and stuff like that. So yeah, again, from something like this to now something like this. Right off the bat, it's way better, way more interesting. So another thing I added is this reverse kick. Basically, you take the kick, click reverse, and cut off the last part of it so it doesn't like pop. So it's just this bass. If you are watching on a phone or a laptop, you probably don't even hear the bass, but you can definitely hear it on better speakers. I also layer it with this, which again, is just this hit reversed, and that results in a little fill, and I add it every 2 bars, so it sounds like this. So yeah, just a little fill that adds a little bit something extra. It's all about the details here. If you have the song idea now you want to work on the details that kind of put the whole thing together. Another thing you can see is I have a crash on the beginning of the drop. A really standard thing, but it helps a lot. Okay, so that's the first step I took in turning this into a full drop. Now let me show you two more sounds that I added. That will be pretty interesting. I added another chord layer, which is the same chords as before, just another layer of sound, which sounds a little bit different. And this sound is actually from the same sound that I used before from the pack, but what I changed is I turned up the unison and the detune. So it's a really detuned version of the same sound that actually gives it a bit more power. As you can hear, without it, it's like this. And with it, it's like this. Just adds a bit more frequencies to the whole sound and makes it a bit fatter in the drop. As far as the effects go, I got a pretty weird EQ here, just sort of deleting all these frequencies and boosting the higher frequencies. That's because I wanted this layer to add those mid to high frequencies in the sound. Okay, another sound I added is this lead melody, and this sound is called Farewell Lead. It's a really cool lead, I love this one. And what I did is basically plays along with the chords for the most part, but sometimes I deviate and create a little bit of a melody, but I wouldn't even call this a melody, it sort of just adds even more to the chords. So it sounds like this. So yeah, as you can hear, the whole thing is sort of more interesting because you can hear this second melody in there. You can differentiate between the chords and the melody, but it's not necessarily its own thing. It sort of complements the chords. That's what I added in the first repetition of the drop. And altogether, it sounds like this. Now let's move on to the second repetition, where I kick things off even more. The transition between the first repetition and the second one is also really important. So what I did here is the last bar is basically just the drums. I remove the bass and the melodies. And I add this fill, a basic acoustic tom fill, and that's how the first repetition of the drop ends. And the second repetition starts off with this fill reversed, this foley, and again this kick transition. And basically the first two bars of the second repetition of the drop are empty pretty much, it's just the fill and this vocal chop. That results in a pretty cool transition between the two repetitions. So the first one ends with the fill, and the second one sort of starts with the reversed fill and the vocal chop. I sort of introduced this vocal chop that I'm gonna use in the drop further. And in this one, I also add another layer to the sound, which is this soft choir sound. Again, the same chords, I just wanted even fuller sound, so I added this one that adds different frequencies to the whole thing. Other than that, we have the same sounds, the melody is continuing. I have few of these slide notes. Everybody loves slide notes, so yeah. And I also added the hi-hats, which are just 3 different hi-hats, but really similar, but I want to have a different sound for them, just so there's this variation. And this is the rhythm they play. Then we have this vocal. I made it sort of distorted. I like that effect, sort of reminded me of Porter Robinson. And I used this plugin, Fruity Squeeze. That's the first time I ever used this plugin. And it worked out pretty well. That's the second repetition. That's where we have the transition. Again, I want to stress out that the transition is really important as well. So that's why I wanted to put some focus on it. I played around with a few sounds, and this turned out to be the best. And then in this second drop, I cut up the chords again slightly differently. As you can see, every 4 bars I have a space for this fill and this vocal, and that's just the way I wanted it. Then we have another 4 bars, and then again there's this empty space. So yeah. For the empty spaces, I choose this fill, the vocal, and again these reversed kicks and stomps. And in the second empty space, I do a similar fill, just slightly different, but same rhythm. And yeah, I cut up this vocal. As you can see, it's pretty important how long the notes are. Some of them are slightly longer, some of them are really short. That creates this nice choppy effect. And to get this, you go to the vocal sample, which is this, and go to envelope and make sure everything is almost at 0 except the sustain, and the release, you can just have it slightly up, but not really. That way the sound only plays as long as you hold the note, so you can get these really short notes. And yeah, that's the second repetition of the drop. And then I even went with the third repetition, which maybe is a bit unusual, but I wanted to get my point across in this video, how you can like expand the drop further and further. And in this third one, I sort of let the drop play out in its full glory. Because in this one, we have a lot of empty spaces. In this one, we have a lot of breaks for the fills. You know, so it constantly sort of stops and gives you this fill break. But in the last one, I sort of played out fully, except just a little break here. But mostly it plays out the whole drop. And I also add this arpeggio, which I panned to the left and right. So it's a bit more interesting when you listen to it. And the sound is called The Last Wave. Again, it's from the SoundConstraints sample pack called Apollo. If you want to get this, all the sounds that I used are from the pack, so I would definitely recommend it. The link will be in the description below. So I added that in the last one and then just played out the whole drop. Sort of played with the melody this time around and created sort of an actual melody instead of just something that complements the chords. This actually has its own thing going. So yeah, and that's pretty much it right there. So the whole point of this video was to kind of show you how you can take a really basic idea of a drop and how you can turn it into a full drop that would actually work in a song. What it comes down to, for the most part, is the details, the effects, a lot of fills and stuff like that. And that's something a lot of people don't teach, a lot of people forget about, and that way a lot of people just end up with something like this. Which sounds good, but it's not really interesting. So that's what I wanted to sort of show you here. I hope you did learn something new. Now let's actually check out the finished result. Enjoy. And hey guys, that is pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I actually think this is a banger track. I might even try to release it. Let me know if you would like to hear the finished track. And make sure to check out SoundConstraints and their new pack, Apollo. Again, as I said, they sort of focus on the quality of the sounds, instead of the quantity, and it's a pretty affordable pack, so I would definitely recommend it. If you want to sort of copy this track that I've made, I think it's definitely possible just based on watching this tutorial. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.